Hello everyone, my name is Jordan, and in this video I'm gonna share to you my pragmatic clean architecture, something that I've shared the image a few while back, and today I'm gonna elaborate more to you. Okay, so without further ado, let's just begin. So pragmatic clean architecture. Firstly, let's just get around on what clean architecture is. In a nutshell, clean architecture is basically you separate your code into a considerable amount of layers. In mine, I split my codes into repositories, services, controllers, and views. Some people might call a different name. For instance, people will call it domain instead of repositories. Some people will call it a UI instead of views, but you can name it whatever you want. So let's go into my first layer, repositories. In this layer, this is basically your API collections. So everything available in your Postman or Insomnia, whatever you call it, you have to create a function on this separately. For instance, here, if I get v1 slash nodes, I will create a functions about get nodes, which is what it does is calling the API to get nodes and prepare every possible query parameters in that functions so that any code that is calling these functions knows what query parameters it can use. That is a repository. So let's get into my second layer, which is services. For example, here I got a functions to create a recipe based on the ingredients that you have. So in order to create a recipe, first thing first, I need to check the balance or coins in the app. And then if the balance is enough, then proceed to create recipe. So this function is created separately because it has a flow and it calls more than one repository functions, and it's just more practical if we create a separate function about it, which is this function, because this alone will have three possibilities. So check the balance, success, create recipe fails. Check the balance, success, create recipe success. And then check the balance fails, then create recipe will be declined. At least three possibilities, and I want to have a single flow to handle it so that any code that is calling these create recipe functions could just get the results without changing anything if anything changes in this function. That's services. Or you might be wondering, why do I create just one functions while these blocks and these blocks can communicate to each other? Don't worry, we'll get to it later. Now the third layer is controllers. This is basically controls what the variables needed to be shown in the UI. That's it. And the fourth layer is views. This is basically what you show to the users. For example, users can see the balance. For instance, like in OVO or in Copay, you'll see your balance. And that's the text to show the balance is on the UI. And the variable that needs to be shown will be in the controller or hooks if you're a web dev. All right, so those are my layers about the clean architecture. Now, what about this word, pragmatic? So, I have really good keys of pragmatic approach introduced to me by a good friend Indra Zulfi. Let's get into it one by one, okay? The first key is Yagni. You aren't gonna need it. Only build what you need right now. Don't over optimize or add unnecessary abstractions just for future use cases. Okay, so in this case, let's go back into here. Why do I only create a one use case? Because I have one rule in the service layer is that just to create a function when it is calling more than one repository functions, because otherwise I will have a redundant function. Okay, for instance, I want to check a balance. Well, just get the balance API and then it's done. There will be no more flow after it's done, right? So if I insist to create a function in this services layer, then I'll just basically return what the balance repo returns. And it's redundant because you need to create the functions and create the dependency injections. It's redundant and it's painful to you because you're doing it. Maybe, in future we will have something like this or that, but that's not gonna happen now, and maybe in very near future, or probably won't happen at all. So I don't create that. Okay, that's a Yagni in my pragmatic clean architecture. The second one is keys. Keep it simple and stupid. Favor simple solutions over the complex ones, even if it means accepting some technical debt in the short term. So, as a front-end engineer, mostly Flutter, keep it simple and stupid is more likely to be the state manager that you pick, because some state manager is really hard to use or hard to learn, at least according to my capabilities, because I am that stupid. So make sure that you created or make sure that you use a very simple state manager that you know how it works. And if you have a new member in your team, they immediately know how it works without a certain amount of time they require to learn how it works. The third key is try. Don't repeat yourself. Reduce duplication where it makes sense, but be careful not to over abstract. So when we do a clean architecture, you basically already done this, because everything that you need, you already created a functions to do that. So for instance, I created a recipe use case function where it does a several flow, check balance, create recipe, or maybe more flow in the future. So when I'm calling this in another code, I don't have to copy paste what's inside it because I just create the functions. If I don't have these functions, then if I need it somewhere else in the code, then I have to copy paste the entire flow, check the balance, check the recipe. And when the flow is updated, maybe doing more actions in the future, I need to update every code that's doing the create recipe. The fourth key is iterative development. Solve problem incrementally, accepting that not everything will be perfect from the start. I don't have much to say about this within this architecture, so maybe you will have something in the experience to tell. I don't have one to be open today. The fifth case is trade-off. Sometimes coupling and cohesion must be compromised to achieve other goals like performance, simplicity, or deadlines. So again, when I talk about this function in the service layer, you might have a certain code standard. This exists here, so it should exist in everywhere else to maintain the code standard. I will gonna say no. If it creates more boilerplates, you're basically making your life difficult. What if your project doesn't really need this? Right? For instance, you don't have this because this flow would not exist. Your project is just basically calling one API and show it, calling one API and show it. You don't need any functions in these layers. Otherwise, you're just creating a boilerplate which is redundant to your codes, right? And this one, if you notice the unit test, I only created here because I think in the other functions, like for instance a repo, we don't have to create a unit test. I could be wrong, but if you're creating unit tests in the API calling function, you will most probably mock the API return anyway, right? But then your backend changes and it breaks your repo and it breaks. So your unit functions doesn't have any way to be put here. That's what I thought. I could be wrong. I am selective on where the unit test should be. If I have some utility or some functions that I need to be sure it shouldn't be changed, then I'll put a unit test there. So yeah, that's it. We have the clean architecture and we have the pragmatic, and thanks for watching.